We've officially launched our brand new Indie Author Bookstore, an online showcase featuring thousands of independently published books by Ally members, and we built it as a visibility engine with authors in mind. Our goal is simple: to help indie authors reach new readers, gain meaningful exposure, and get noticed by book influencers who are actively looking for fresh voices and standout stories. You've done the hard work of writing, editing, publishing, and launching. Now let's make sure your book gets the attention it deserves. Upload your books onto the Indie Author Bookstore. Not an Ally member yet? Join us and get your books listed. I'm Howard Lovey of the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com, and you're listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. Every episode, I interview an Ally member to find out what inspires them and how they are an inspiration to other authors. My guest this episode is Cliff Lovette, an Atlanta-based author who came to fiction after a long career as an entertainment lawyer, working with major artists during a pivotal time in the music industry. He held on to a remarkable true story about a Soviet circus stranded in the United States for more than 30 years before turning it into his novel. I'll let Cliff Lovette tell his story.
Hi, my name is Cliff Lovette, here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had a career, raised a family here, and had a career in the entertainment business. I was an entertainment lawyer, and now I call myself an author because I just released my debut book, Circus Bim Bom, A Cold War Adventure.
Well, congratulations on becoming an author. And yeah, you can call yourself that because that's what you are. And it sounds like you've been a lot of other things in your life too. So let's go back in time a little bit and tell me where you grew up and were books always a part of your life?
I grew up on Long Island, Westbury, and books didn't really become a part of my life until I went to high school. I went to a private school. It's a Quaker school where they emphasized literature, and I had some really inspirational English teachers who I dedicate in part the book to. And then I was introduced to theater and performed in quite a few plays. Then I attended Tufts University, and I continued with some creative writing courses there. I majored in philosophy. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but it seemed like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the critical thinking. And I had a year after college that I decided to just hang out and really kind of little lost soul a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then I applied to law school. I was accepted at Emory and came down to Atlanta, attended Emory Law School. And
well, let's stop right there. You're rushing on ahead with your life.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Let's go back a little bit to why you decided to go into law after studying philosophy for 4 years.
Well, I think it was the idea of persuasion, rhetoric, and the critical thinking aspect of it. I wasn't sure what type of law I wanted to practice. I came from a family of lawyers, so that's a head start. Mm-hmm. But most of them weren't practicing law by the time I decided to attend. And I just figured that was a good foundation for whatever it was that I was going to do next.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't necessarily that you wanted to become a lawyer, but you saw it as a way to kind of springboard into something else?
Exactly.
Yeah. I know how family expectations go. I come from a family of doctors, and I'm the black sheep who became a writer. Mm-hmm. So eventually you found yourself in entertainment law. How did your career head in that direction?
Well, I enjoyed being around creative people. I fancied myself being very creative. And I took a course at Emory Law School. In fact, I encouraged the school to start a course in entertainment law, and I helped provide the educational material for it. And at that time, Atlanta was starting to emerge as a film center for film production. And then, of course, it blossomed as a music industry center. Mm-hmm. And so there were a lot of creative people around, and there was that almost like a creative energy, and mm-hmm. that attracted me. And I was fortunate that probably one of the top entertainment law firms in the world was based in Atlanta, and they represented a lot of recording artists and record company executives and record companies, and I was able to get a job as the sort of like the lawyer grunt at this entertainment law firm.
That's great. So impress us, name drop for us.
Well,
You rub elbows with.
we represented almost all the country music stars at the time. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Merle Haggard, George Strait, also Jimmy Buffett, a lot of R&B acts. We represented the Jacksons, not Michael Jackson individually, but them as a group. And then I ended up getting a job as a senior vice president of a record company called LaFace Records, which was at the time a small record company, but it happened to be one of the most successful small record companies in history. We had Usher, Tony Braxton, TLC, Outkast, Goody Mob. So I got to rub shoulders, if you will, with all those people. And my bosses were L.A. Reid and Babyface. So it was part of the first BMG family.
So not just representing, random musical artists, but you were part of a period of musical history.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that I was, because LaFace Records started as a small joint venture that was given to two enterprising creative musical geniuses, LA and Babyface, at a time when that wasn't the norm, to give producers that kind of creative and financial support.
Yeah.
And so I went for the ride.
That's great. Now, in the meantime, did you always have a secret manuscript in your desk drawer, or did that come later?
Well, it coincidentally enough, when I was working at the law firm, normally what happened was, if a new client came in that wasn't well established, they would send them down the hall to me. And so Bobby Lieberman came into the office, and he was sent to me, and he looked like some young kind of hippie, long hair, road warrior. He was a road manager. He managed Jimmy Buffett's tours and a couple of other well-established artist tours, making sure that they got from place to place and they got their hotel rooms and whatnot. And he came in and sat down and says, "I got a story you will not believe." And he proceeded to tell me the story of Circus Bim Bom. So the story that I wrote about is based on an actual circus that came to the United States back in 1990. And the story he told me was so fantastical. I couldn't have dreamed it up myself. And it stuck with me for more than 30 years before I had gained the courage to do anything about it.
Tell me a little bit about the story that Lieberman told you.
Well, he had just gotten a divorce from his wife. He returned home from a Jimmy Buffett tour to his house that was empty, and a Dear Bobby letter. And the next day he was served with divorce papers, and he was kind of crushed. Then he got a Sony Betamax tape of this Soviet circus that was going to be arriving in America for a 24-month tour. And he was asked if he wanted to road manage it. And he didn't really, at the time, he really so depressed, he didn't really want to do anything until he popped the cassette into the player and saw all these leggy Soviet, performers. So he decided to take the job, and they came to the United States. What was unique about it is they came as a private enterprise. So this is the first time that Gorbachev had, with his experiment in capitalism, and he was trying to impress the Bush and the West with his intentions of joining countries of peace and democracy.
This was 1991, the height of Glasnost, right?
Yeah, 19 Glasnost was started in 1985. Right. And then the height of it was 1990, the year before Soviet Union ended. So this was in April of 1990 that the circus came, and the managers of the circus knew nothing about capitalism. So they unwittingly signed a deal with associates of the Vegas mob to help promote them. And the rest is in the book.
Wow. Okay. And, you also mentioned in a separate email to me that there was some participation from the movement for Soviet Jewry.
Well, I mean, there were there were part of what I felt I was compelled to do was tell the story of the Soviet Jewry movement and the history of Soviet Jews as oppressed people. And so I was trying to figure out how I was going to lace that into the story. And what I did was, and this is true, when there were a handful of the Soviets who were Jewish, now back then they were not allowed to practice their religion. Things were starting to loosen up, but there weren't any temples or synagogues of note,
Hmm.
and no one had ever read, the First Testament, the Old Testament, and their only identity as Jews was on their domestic passports,
Right.
you know. And so they came to Wheeling, West Virginia, where they rehearsed for a couple of weeks, and they saw some Hebrew on a butcher shop in the main part of town. So they walked in, and they were greeted by the patriarch of the family, the Jewish family that owned the butcher shop for about 100 years, and he invited them to their first Passover. So they attended their first Passover in Wheeling, West Virginia, and there's a chapter in the book dedicated to that.
Hmm.
And then I get into the chapter it's called Let My People Go, which is really about reconciliation. And we did discuss the Exodus and those other, themes and rituals and histories of the Jewish movement.
Hmm. Now, you spent decades collecting research and materials about that circus before you finally began writing. Why did you hold on to it for so many years?
It's a good question. Perhaps because back in my mind, I knew it was too important a story to just throw away. I mean, I literally would I'd move from office to office or apartment to home, and I would always purge whatever I had. Sometimes they were in storage units, but I never threw away the banker's boxes. And over the years, I collected quite a bit of artifacts and memorabilia. There were still a handful of Soviets that had stayed in Atlanta, including the guy who managed the circus, and Bobby, of course. So I started interviewing, and I got a few law student interns to do some heavy duty research. So I compiled a 50-page dossier on everything, collected articles, names, and I have the original program from the circus. I've got photographs of the circus performers at a July 4th, their first July 4th celebration on a lake
Hmm.
here in Atlanta. And so I just collected that stuff. And, I always regaled my friends with the story. I'm a storyteller in my bones. So I knew that's usually the go-to story that people wanted to hear about. And I would talk about it. And then eventually my best friend, who was at the time diagnosed with cancer, he insisted that I start writing it. And then the pandemic came along and I had nothing else to do, so I had no excuse. And I
Yeah.
started writing the story.
So that's a long time to hold on to what could be called an obsession. So what was the the difference between this story and other stories out there? What was the thing that connected with you the most and connected with the people who you told the stories to?
Well, these are people that came to a country, and while some of them were thinking, others were very loyal communists. And not only that, but it was an all-star circus. These circus performers were pulled from 70 different circuses. Most of them hadn't performed together as a circus until this circus. So they were coming to a strange land that was a former enemy for, since the 50s, if at the start of the Cold War. And they were experiencing freedom for the first time. And a lot of them were experiencing it in different ways. And they were artisans, they were, performers. And I also think that story and this is one of the main themes of my book, is that the storytelling is a means for transformation in thought and perception. And a lot of the great movements, whether the civil rights movements or other transformations in civil thinking, occurred with story.
Hmm.
And and the circus is the embodiment of that story. They came over under the banner of goodwill, peace and goodwill. So they were coming to open up and hold out their hands to Americans. And, that to me was fascinating.
Now, is this straight history, or is it, I guess, what you call creative nonfiction? How would you describe it?
It's clearly fiction. While I have a lot of information and I want it to be authentic, it is the ringmaster is the narrator of the story, and his creed is never let truth ruin great story.
Mhm.
So the message and the message and the story was much more important than the trying to be factual. And he sort of warns the reader in the first chapter. This is not investigative reporting. He says some people will probably deny they said something, or they would insist that I fact check their alibi.
Mhm.
But so that wasn't the important thing. But I wanted people to get the sense that that it was authentic, that it wasn't just a a story of fantasy. And as a result, I included a lot of people that were real people that involved in the story, including, Gorbachev and President Bush and their administrations, and Newt Gingrich, and, some of the main characters were actual people that were part of the circus.
Now, your book also comes with a very elaborate companion ecosystem. I was looking at your website, and that takes a while to delve into. You've got animated character introductions, book clubs, music links embedded. What inspired you to build that kind of a reader experience around the novel?
Well, I think of myself as a storyteller first, and the literary way of telling a story with words and books is just one way. And I didn't want to limit myself to that. I really wanted to immerse the reader, my audience, with as many senses as I could. So I embodied QR code links to YouTube music and videos in the book itself. So, for example, when the circus is entering the Hershey Arena, they play the iconic entrance of the gladiators, which is a
Mhm.
symphonic music. I actually have a link to that, so that in the chapter, so the reader could opt to actually listen to that symphony and that music while they're reading about the circus entering into the arena. So in one chapter that's called Tear Down This Wall, which covers the Reagan's iconic speech in front of the Brandenburg Gate. And at the end of the chapter, I have the full 20-minute video if someone wants to watch. It shouldn't interfere with their read of the book because it's at the end of the chapter.
Mhm.
And in terms of the website, I I really wanted to build a community. I was hoping to write the kind of book that people would want to talk to each other about and share their feelings and thoughts. And so I wanted to build a communal place, a virtual place. So I built the Bim Bam Book Club on a community theme. So you go in there, you're invited in by the ringmaster who gives you a quick tour. And there's a reader's room where you could, have live chats with other readers or visitors. And there are forums. And so there's a lot of interactivity in the website. And you mentioned the character avatars. That idea and what they are basically authentic looking visual images, heads
Mhm.
that that have voices, and they speak. The performers speak in English with Soviet accents, and I actually created each individual voice. And I originally did that because some of my beta readers were commenting that they had a real hard time keeping track of all the Soviet characters and names. I
Oh,
mean, it's about a circus. I probably have about 45 speaking characters, and
wow, like an old Russian novel, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, first I wrote a glossary that I was going to put in the book because it turned out it was going to be like 20 pages long. So I decided to create these character avatars. And it's also a means of discovery. You could go to the website and there's a character room, or you could go to my YouTube channel and you could meet the characters. They're not spoiling the story, but they'll give some background and you'll get a sense of their personality. And even Gavish, the circus chimpanzee, has a introduction where he's,
So,
go ahead.
how is that going? How is participation? How long has your book been out?
The book has only been out since the 1st of March.
Oh, okay. All right.
The paperback came out a couple weeks early because of a quirk with Amazon. They said they weren't going to don't provide pre-orders of the paperback, but because I signed up with Ingram Spark, they started buying the books from Ingram Spark and offering them and the paperback and pre-order. So
Hmm.
I decided to release the paperback a little bit early, but it's still early. It's so early. I mean, I just started running Facebook ads like on the 7th, and I just finished a Marianne Yard's book blog tour. It's a 23 spot tour. And I was really happy. I got 11 reviewers to write 11 5-star reviews. So I was really excited about that.
Mhm.
But, it's pretty early it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I get it. Yeah. Well, what kind of readers would be attracted to this? Are history buffs, people
I think it's
interested in
going to be,
circuses, or?
I think it's going to be a cross section. It's certainly going to skew older, meaning maybe some 35-year-olds, but not much younger, and up to, people who continue to read books in their 70s and 80s. I've had one reader from Sydney who's a distant relative, and he's in his 80s, and he really enjoyed the book. So it's people that are attracted to complex and multi-layered genre bending stories.
Yeah.
And that provoke conversation and thought and have multiple themes and deep meanings. But it's also very entertaining.
Now, you publish independently and are part of the Alliance of Independent Authors. What
Yes, I
drew
am.
you to the indie route rather than traditional publishing?
My background is in the music business, and back in 20 years ago, when all of a sudden there was a shift in the music industry where before there were a few conglomerates, large record companies, Sony, BMG, Polygram, Warner Brothers, that can really controlled the recording as well as the distribution of records. And then when the internet came along and digital recording came along, it freed up independents to be able to record outside of expensive recording studios and get their music directly to their
Hmm.
customers. So that created a major disruption in the music industry. At first, the conglomerates fought it very hard, including suing a lot of people
Hmm. I remember.
and making threats. And they realized that perhaps too late, not too late, but they realized they should have realized sooner, but they didn't, that the train left the station and there was nothing they could do about it. And then all of a sudden they realized that they're going to have to change their business model. I don't know a lot about the publishing industry, but from what I've read and seen, it seems like the publishing industry is going through a similar disruption. It may
Yeah.
be early in that stage. It's been a while for self-publishers to have the kind of resources now that they do to support them and help them, whether it's draft to digital or books by, or, a lot of YouTube channel experts that provide advice.
Yeah.
And so I think the means of creating a book as well as selling a book and getting to your readers has changed. And I really like the fact that I direct sale with Books By, that I get to send an email of thanking my readers and providing them with free goodies and maintain a relationship with my readers.
Hmm.
I don't get that with Amazon
Yeah.
or the traditional publishers. So plus I'm really creative, and I can't imagine that a traditional publisher would have allowed me to use that book cover
Right. Right.
or done some of the
Yeah,
creative things I wanted
I
to.
always thought it was strange that if you're an indie label in the music industry, you're considered really cool, and that hasn't transferred yet to the publishing industry. Maybe we'll get there.
Well, I think once you start to see independent self-published authors achieve similar levels of success over a period of time and forego the traditional publishing route, not decide, okay, well, now I'm going to go traditional. I think that that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
Well, now that you've made the leap from law to fiction, how has this experience changed the way you think about creativity, storytelling, and I guess the second half of your career?
Well, first of all, I realized that even though I put my metaphorical pen down and I'm not being an author first and foremost right now, although I'm going to have to start revising my second book, which is complete, and I hope to get it out in December. It's just a sequel to this book. So the story continues. It ends abruptly and continues. And I start now having to be a publisher and learn marketing and promotion. And I decided that I'm going to take the same approach to it. I'm telling stories. I'm a storyteller at heart. So why don't I tell a story about my story? Mm-hmm. And so what I've done is I've created a lot of videos, of course, the character avatars, but I actually have created videos of the characters in certain scenes, and I've distributed those. This morning, I woke up and I belong to about 250 Facebook groups that are related to the writing, publishing, and storytelling, and I sent them all my reel of two of the main characters who are in a romantic tryst. And I sent them as a reel. So, and the book, the website itself is a continuation of the story.
So you're a webmaster in addition to being an author.
And I never done that before. I mean, really.
You're the poster person for indie publishing, in that you're not just thinking about the book. You're thinking about your author brand too. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Cliff. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. I'm Howard Lovey, Content and Communications Manager at the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. If you are a member of Ally and would like to be considered for the show, please write to me at howard@allianceindependentauthors.org and tell me what inspires you and how you can inspire other authors. As always, find more author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.